Maybe that's like one of the toilet attendants' jobs is to like go in every hour and count the toilets.
Hello and welcome to House of Bards. I'm Beth and this is my co-host Alex.
Hello.
We are a podcast about role-playing mostly, but sometimes Sailor Moon and magical girl discussions.
Yeah, sometimes.
This is a podcast about whatever we feel like it at the time. And I think we're doing a fantastic job of holding up the farce that it's about role-playing.
Well, I mean, it's not like we don't talk about role-playing.
No,
we do talk about that a lot. I feel it's more like we gather under the pretext of it being about role-playing, and then sometimes we talk about that, but largely because we like talking about stuff, and we both do it. We do, role-playing games, so that's one of the things we talk about. Yes. But in any case, today, because we've been kind of on a kick recently, with recent episodes, haven't we, of like this idea of making your own content. Yeah, what did we start with? I think I might be missing one, but I think we started with, crafting your own scenario. And then we got bigger with a big double episode extravaganza of crafting your own game, basically, your own game premise. Which was made so big with the expectation that, like, I would be able to release one episode as an episode as an update, and then the other half of it as like another update, because we weren't expecting Beth to have time off to record for a while. And indeed she didn't, but you're probably going to see this episode like immediately after those two, because it was so big, it took me so long to edit that we're now like recording this one now. So
it happens.
I mean, you're getting more podcasts. So my point here being that we're gonna like draw it right back in small, and we're gonna go with an idea that was submitted to us in the comments on YouTube on episode 12, I believe. So like over a year ago.
Yeah, like literally ages ago.
By Gareth, who you might remember from the game of Bards, and that is build your own monster,
if you will, a monster factory.
Oh damn shit. Shut it down. We're done. We have made a grave error.
No, but like technically, since Gareth suggested this,
no, I don't believe that the thing that you are about to say is correct, Beth. But we are supposed to be making like a monster rather than using a tool that is supposed to make normal people to make a monstrosity. So whilst it might be similar in potential name, it's not really similar in premise to Monster Factory, so we're probably okay.
Yeah, we're not IGN. We're not doing beast manufacturing. With
it may just be my like inflated sense of esteem in us as a podcast, Beth. But I feel like even if we ripped off Monster Factory, we would not be as bad as IGN.
No, I know. Yeah,
I think we would have some more humility about it, at least.
I think even if we reviewed games for a living and had our own website and called it IPN, we still wouldn't be as bad as IGN.
IGN are not.
Even if we went out with the intent to copy IGN, we would still be better than IGN by proxy of not being IGN.
IGN are part of the reason why I don't play Telltale games anymore, so fuck them and their shitty website. Anyway, enough about what we're not, because...
Yeah. Because what we are,
ostensibly, is a podcast about role-playing games. I feel like we're going to contextualize this one heavily into the context of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, largely because there's not really a great way of talking about this in a system-agnostic way without our advice becoming basically so vague that it's completely useless. So I will say that a lot of systems support the idea of you inventing new opponents, monsters, NPCs, that kind of thing, and will give you tools in their source book to do it. So I mean, obviously, look at those. We're just going to take you through how 5th edition D&D recommends you do it, and also what we think about that, to try and get the ball rolling, I guess.
Yeah. So,
I guess as a warm-up, we might want to talk about why you might want to make a monster.
I think that's, it's pretty obvious. Eventually, you're gonna get to a point where you have a really good idea for something, and you're gonna be like, oh, but there isn't really a monster in the monster manual that would suit this. Or you're gonna get to a point where you're gonna be like, oh, I'm kind of feeling confident enough that I want to maybe make my own thing here.
Yeah, and I feel like unless you only run, like, pre-written scenarios, this is a problem that you're going to run into. Like, regardless of how closely your DMing style follows along to what is already in the books, like, regardless of how little imagination, ambition, whatever your style has, there's going to be a time when you run into, like, even if it's like as simple as you have a named character who has to behave like a non-named character because your party want to fight them. Like, you have to... I'm just going to, like, look in the back of the monster manual here, where there are a bunch of general case people, I guess, NPCs, humanoids, sapient humanoids. And there'll be times when the party will be like, we don't like this guy, we want to fight him. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, Terrence is Terrence, but I can't just, like, come up with a stat block for Terrence on the fly, so I'm going to have to, like, pick what I think is the closest to what Terrence is as a character and just use that stat block, with maybe rolling the dice recommended in the hit points field to, like, give him a bit of special stuff. And maybe you look through and you're like, okay, I think Terrence is a druid.
Yeah.
Right. And he's challenge level 2. They say the druid is challenge level 2. Okay, that sounds about right. He's not a particularly strong druid. Whatever. So you might do that. Or, at the other end of the spectrum, you might be like, okay, this thing I want to do, most of the time, going to use monsters that I have access to in the monster manual. But for, like, the end of it, I have this particular theme that's running through my story that involves monsters that just aren't in the book.
Yeah.
So, really, like, you are going to run into this problem sooner or later, and it helps to know how to deal with it.
And I think it's also, like, there are going to be a lot of, obviously Dungeons and Dragons does this thing where it's like, really, your place shouldn't own the monster manual and the DMG, but that's slightly unrealistic of Wizards to expect.
It is, and I feel like it's one of the holdovers from the Gygax era. Although even in the Gygax era, it was kind of bollocks.
Yeah. You're going to have friends who own the monster manual because they like the monster manual, or you're going to have friends who own all of the books.
Realistically, if you're in a group that has, like, multiple people who like to DM, even if you're all, like, assuming good faith about who does or doesn't reference that information if they have it, you're still going to have people who have access to that information, whether they like it or not.
Yeah, like... and you're going to be like, you want to surprise your players every now and then. You want to catch them out. And you can't do that if they know all of the fucking monsters in the monster manual.
It's true.
They're like, someone go, oh, I know exactly what this monster is because I've read about it extensively in the monster manual. And you're like, God damn it, Greg.
And there might just be some people who are bad at role-playing, specifically not having information that they as a person have. So they might be like, oh, I'm not going to ruin my DM's campaign even though I know what this monster is. But they don't actually, like, implement that desire any further than having their character go, oh, what are these things? I have never seen them before.
Yeah. Like, personally, I'm of the opinion as a DM that if you know something that you think to an extent your character would, if you've got, like, a very learned wizard and you know that this is like a basilisk you're going to go off and fight, to me it makes sense that your wizard can go, I've read about basilisks in books and know their weaknesses. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, there is that. I think like, as with many of these things, the what it comes down to is use your own judgment. Because It's
And
like
again,
a lot
yeah.
of the time that's probably going to be fine, but there might be like a particular bit of specialist knowledge that you have that you think not a lot of people in real life know this, so maybe I should ask the DM if I'm allowed to have my character know this.
Yeah, which is, again...
Oh, and that comes up if you're playing at a university club, a fuck ton, because... And I'm not saying that I am any different in the times when we would do, like, sci-fi games or something and interact with computers, but students love justifying the large amount of money that they are spending on an education, and therefore, like, whenever something pertaining to your specialist subject comes up in a game, you're going to be ridiculously anal about it. Like, in one of my games I had, like, a physics student who explained to me in great depth how distribution of weight worked, because I was trying to fuck the party over with a collapsing platform lift in a way that he maintained was physically impossible. And I was like, all right, okay. And yeah, obviously you're going to run into problems with that when there's an overlap between what the character and the player are supposed to know.
Yeah. Like, I'm not looking forward, because the people who I'm trying to gather for my Traveller campaign, I know at least a few of them will probably be physics students. I'm not looking forward to that game, to being that DM at all. To the point where I think I'm probably going to specifically put in a scenario where they have to do trivia on art history, just to, to justify... I don't know.
Now I'm just thinking of that episode of Doctor Who where they're going to crash into the sun, and they have, like, a fuck ton of weird-ass trivia questions as, like, the recovery codes on, like, a sequence of doors. That's probably what it's going to end up as.
Yeah, that's what? Who is this painting? Who is this painting by? And it's like, that'd be good. Anyway, right, I'm writing that idea down. 1 second. Flying into sun must answer trivia questions on art history. Here we go. Anyway, yeah, but you're gonna want there to be a bit of mystery sometimes for your player characters and stuff like that. And you want it, and again, it just makes it exciting and stuff like that. Like here is a new thing you haven't seen before, and everyone's like, that's awesome, And sometimes, like, I love the monster manual. I think it's brilliant, but there isn't really, like, it's difficult sometimes to see the really good boss potential in monsters for me.
There's also the problem that there are certain areas that the original monster manual, at least, is bad at filling. Like, something that I've run into recently is there's not a whole lot of Fae.
Yeah, so, I remember that problem.
You guys have gone to the Feywild, and it's like, I've got hags, and I've got, like, satyrs, and there's probably going to be a nymph at some point. And then there'll be, like, little, like, fairies and pixies and stuff who are going to do, like, mischief and shit. But there's not a lot of high-level stuff, apart from if you get, like, 3 hags together and make them into a coven, which is basically going to be all hags in the Feywild, just because they're, like, they have to be a formidable threat. And this is a problem that undead run into as well, that you have, early on, you have, like, loads and loads and loads of, like, level 1, level 2, even level 0 undead. And then there's this drought of undead until you get to, like, the really powerful stuff like Death Knights and Liches and that. There are not a lot of, like... there are not a lot of, like, challenge level 8 undead, for instance.
Yeah, which is, like...
Like, you're pretty much stuck with vampires around challenge rating 10, and that's about it. Which is a problem if you're doing, like, an undead-themed scenario or dungeon with characters who are, like, those levels, because basically you either find some way to weaken a higher level undead, or you just throw lots and lots of lower level undead at the party, which can get boring.
Or everyone you meet is a vampire for, like,
which is
5 solid levels, which is going to be really boring.
And also, like, if you're trying to do it like it's undead... in Dwarf Fortress, there's a type of biome where basically nothing stays dead. Like, you hack off bits of undead bodies, and those bits come back to life, and shit like that. And it's like, that's different, I think, to the kind of theme where everyone is a vampire. because like there's a different speed of game implied by that. Like all the stuff that we talked about in the Halloween episode about vampires and stuff. Like, despite being undead, they're a very different kind of undead from the rest of the undead. So you run into this problem that it's not really a unity of theme.
Yeah, like, presumably you would be able to talk a vampire out of attacking you, whereas you don't have that privilege with a zombie.
And I mean, maybe like, you have, like, you supplement the undead tribe with other stuff. Like, maybe you're like, okay, well, I don't have access to a lot of undead, but I could throw in some high-level mage characters who are necromancers. And, like, they're the ones controlling the undead. Maybe have some intrigue around that. But it's good to have options. So being able to come up with a monster is, I think, a useful skill to have.
Again, not just like, and then, let's talk a little bit about other systems, but other systems expect you to create your own monsters and come up with your own ideas. Some of them go, well, actually, you should be able to do this on your own. So here's some ideas, but otherwise have at it. And, like, you've got to learn how to do this stuff, guys. Yeah. It's important.
It's just,
it will help you grow as a DM.
Unlikely, because I think actually, even if you try and stick to pre-generated scenarios, you're always going to have the problem that occasionally your players are going to wander off and do, like, they're going to hop off the railroad tracks and go and do something weird, and you're like, alright, I've got to, like, get them back on it, but I've got to, like, deal with whatever they eventually find. Like, what makes sense in this world for them to find here? And it's probably going to be like, if it's people, you absolutely have to, like, find a type of monster that they can be, a human type of monster generally, although they could be like maybe.
Well, aren't humans the real monsters?
I would say in real life, quite possibly, but in Dungeons and Dragons, we are readily provided with a great number of things that are significantly more the real monsters than humans.
Yeah.
It's kind of why I don't really fuck with the idea of human dominance in fantasy worlds, because I'm like, this does not make sense. Yeah, it's like,
it doesn't, it's like humans, they were the real monsters all along, and then the wizard's like, well, there is a owlbear, like, right there. I think he's a bit more monstrous than we are.
But, so maybe, like all right, we're kind of beating around the bush here. We want to talk about, like, making monsters.
But
one of the first things that I would recommend if you really, really want to try and avoid, because it can be scary, this idea of making monsters yourself, is you've probably figured out, if you're playing 5th edition, that previous editions, being longer in the tooth, have a much bigger collection of potential monsters. And you might think, wow, I bet if I could find the monster that I wanted in those collections, such as the 2nd edition collection, which pretty much is entirely available on Lomian DE, which I think we've linked to in the past, then all I would need is a way of converting that into 5th edition. And there are actually tools online to help you do that. If I can remember the one I most recently used, then I will link it in the description, because that's helpful to have. Because then you have access to, like, a large amount of the history of Dungeons and Dragons. And there are going to be, like, weird esoteric problems with monsters that you convert that way, but that's really only going to be a problem in the wider picture. Like, if you were going to publish a scenario with these monsters in it, your players can generally handle, like, a bit of a weird balance issue. And obviously, I mean, like, manually fix anything that looks, like, pointedly wrong when it comes out of the end of one of these tools, because there are always going to be, like, problems like that. But the second thing, which is possibly even more easy to do, and this is, I think, the easiest way of creating new monsters, is you can think, does this necessarily need to be a new monster? Because when it comes down to it, Dungeons and Dragons isn't real.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say it. It is in fact pretending. The monsters, similarly, with the exception, I suppose, of those monsters that represent terrestrial animals, and even them in a metatextual sense, are also not real. They are conceptual ideas attached to collections of words and numbers that correspond to game rules. The thing about this, like, the where I'm going with this is, you can take the stat block off one monster and stick it onto the monster that you're thinking of.
Yeah.
maybe with no alterations whatsoever, and that's fine. And this is recommended by the Dungeon Master's Guide, actually. The example that they use, I believe, is if you wanted to create an arboreal, a large arboreal monster that eats elves. And you're like, well, I don't have anything like that in the monster manual, but I've got a Quaggoth, which is a large hunting monster that has a climbing speed. So maybe I take that and I swap out a few of its damage types and resistances for things that are more appropriate to the monster that I want, and then I come up with a description for this monster, which is just, I don't want to say is just fluff, because obviously that's important to your player's first impression of what the monster is, but mechanically it doesn't really make the monster different from the Quaggoth when it comes to fighting it, which is good, because it's free to make up that kind of fluff, whereas if you're not I mean, it's also free to make up new... But you get me, it's significantly less effort if you have trouble engaging with the mechanics of the game.
Yeah, like, I'm currently, in my game, I basically just modified a Drider to make a horrible mantid monster. And there are certain things that need changing within that. Like, obviously, mantises and spiders are very different from each other. But in terms of size and what you would expect them to be able to do and the damage they'd be able to take, you'd expect it to be quite similar, really.
Right.
Yeah.
And you can change stuff. I don't actually have... Do I have the... Yeah. Hang on. You can change stuff that, like, it seems obviously... would be different, right? Quite easily. So I'm trying to find, like, what would be a good example here. Problem is, you got to think of something that the monster manual doesn't have, and then change it. One of the easiest options, I suppose, which the Dungeon Master's Guide points out, is that you can change if it's like a humanoid entity and it's carrying a physical weapon, and you're like, well, that makes sense for this monster, but the monster that I want it to pretend to be would carry a different kind of thing. There are stats for weapons in the player's handbook, which you can just like swap out that weapon, and you, generally speaking, don't have to worry about the effect of that on the challenge rating, because unless it's like a legendary weapon or something, that is probably going to be minimal. And if you're just running for your party, it's not honestly a problem. So, it's difficult because they have actually like covered a lot of the basic mythological bases.
Yeah, to be fair.
One that I will mention, of course, is they were very good to provide a basic template for lycanthropes.
Yeah.
They have some rules about player characters as lycanthropes, which betray patterns that mean that you can very easily increase the number of kinds of lycanthrope. Like, one of the things in my... actually, two of the things in my setting is, in addition to the ones in the book, there are two other kinds of lycanthrope, and those are were-crocodiles and were-spiders. And there may be others beyond that, but they haven't turned up. And what's quite clear if you look through the section of for lycanthropes in the Monster Manual is the thing about lycanthropes is that they tend to have like one focus stat that's particularly high. And like in most cases, in fact in all cases except the were-rat, it's strength. You get high strength. In the were-rat's case, it's dexterity. And I was like, okay, well, for the were-crocodile, I probably do want it to be strength. But in the case of the were-spider, it's probably going to be dexterity because, giant spiders, I guess, are like probably quite strong. But the main thing is that they have that ability of freedom of movement. And another thing that I did is like give them spider climb in all forms. Just all the time. They always have it. Which is kind of high-powered, especially when it comes to Jay, who is a were-spider.
Yeah.
But, it makes sense for the characters to have. And that's the kind of decision that you can make. Just the were-tiger does get strength. So there's that. There's also, like, you might just find that you can just have the monster as it is with no particular change in its stat block at all, just by describing it differently. Like, I would encourage you to do that with mimics, because the mimic is... The image that they use of the mimic is of a treasure chest with a load of teeth and a big purple tongue.
The classic, yeah.
The classic. It's tried and true. It does make some degree of sense because a lot of the time, especially in like traditionalist role-playing games, like that's a desirable thing. A chest. You want to open the chest. You want to get the treasure out of the chest, or at least look in the chest because it's an object of curiosity. Why would a creature that preys on adventurers not figure out that this is like a way like a flower attracts an insect, right? But the problem is it's boring, and once you do it too much, your players begin to expect it, which makes them like weirdly apprehensive of things like chests. And it's never really explicitly stated that mimics have to turn into chests either. Like, in fact, it even says, mimics are shape-shifting predators able to take on the form of inanimate objects, just inanimate objects, plural, to lure creatures to their doom. And so you could have, like, chests are not the only things that adventurers frequently interact with. You could have a mimic that turns into a door that actually goes nowhere, but just, like, you know, flattens itself against
a door that goes nowhere apart from the mimic's mouth.
Guess. Like, you could have the mimic's mouth behind it, but you could also have, like, the door is the mimic, but the mimic has just sort of, like, flattened itself against the wall to give the appearance that there's, like, an exit out of this room. But actually, no, you try and grab the door handle and it sticks to you in exactly the way that a normal chest mimic would, but it's a door. Or maybe you could have a mimic that is... what's something else that people would frequently touch?
I mean, I in the game of Bards, I had a mimic that turned itself into a rug.
That's true, right.
And I mean, you cottoned on, like, pretty quickly, like, nah. And I think killed him from outside the room, but
I feel like this isn't done frequently in role-playing games, but in real life, I can imagine mimics disguising themselves as lavatories quite frequently.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because, like, that's a thing that hundreds of people interact with every day, so they have prey waiting for them. And it tends to be a thing that people interact with alone, so it doesn't have to worry about, like, getting ganged up on.
Yeah, like, I bet you that there's, like, in most fantasy worlds, it's like, they'll be like, count the number of stalls when you enter an establishment. Are there 6? Are there 6, but only 5 sinks? Tell the manager.
Maybe that's like one of the
immediately.
toilet attendants' jobs is to like go in every hour and count the toilets.
Yeah, like
just in case mimics get in, right? But this is the thing: is that all of these mimics, because the mimic has the false appearance and adhesive properties, which allow it to be indistinguishable from a stationary object while it remains motionless and adhere to anything that touches it, it doesn't really need a huge number of special powers pertaining to what form it takes. So even though it's this variety of different things, they all use the same stat block. And I mean, you might run into problems where the challenge rating is only 2, and you might say, oh, I want a stronger mimic. And it's like, there are ways of dealing with that. You can bump up the stats to deal with that. Or maybe make its weapons hit more, that kind of thing.
Yeah. You have that impossibly strong toilet mimic.
Yeah. You know. No, I tell you what, like, you look at the toilets and you count the toilets and you're like, yes, right, okay. And then you find out the mimic is actually the shower cubicle.
Yeah.
Which, like, you just get inside that. It doesn't even have to do anything. Yeah. Like, it can only assume something that big now because it's got so fat, just because of, like, people just walking inside it. Right?
No, I'm like thinking of like stuff like, I don't know, assassins sending like mimics to like go mimic toilets in like foreign countries to get rid of like diplomats they don't like, and you know, like he died on the toilet, a toilet mimic.
Oh,
don't be the 1 in 5 people who didn't count the toilets when they entered an establishment. I actually think we should just move on to creating a monster.
Right. Okay. Well, let's do that then.
Yeah.
So I was thinking what we could do is to try and get a variety of the styles presented. We could make a legendary monster for ourselves with legendary actions and a lair and all of that shit, and make that from scratch. But we could also have minions for it, where we just reskin an existing monster, because then we get the best of both worlds, don't we?
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm just trying to think. What's a really obvious... what is either a really obvious hole that could be filled in the monster manual, or just a really cool thing we can do?
I like your idea of there's not many fair monsters in the monster manual, so let's fill that void. I'm
having trouble, because I anticipated this, and I was like, I should look up some... The thing about the Fae is that
Yeah.
mythologically the idea is supposed to be that the existing Fae are significantly more powerful than Dungeons & Dragons presents them as being.
Yeah.
Largely because they're magical and they're supposed to fuck with, like, terrestrial humans. The kind where if you see them represented on the tabletop board, they're generally represented in, like, Call of Cthulhu rather than Dungeons & Dragons.
Yeah.
Like, they fuck with explorers and scholars, not warriors, is the thing. Which means that there's not a huge number of traditional Fae stories that, like, lend themselves to a particularly powerful boss monster is the problem.
Yeah.
And I really wish that we could do that, and I do have some plans. Like, I have plans for my game, what the Queen of the Fae actually is. Which is exciting to do. But I don't know that with the time that we have, that's really going to go anywhere.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
Well, here's an idea.
Yeah.
A theme that isn't particularly explored in Dungeons & Dragons, largely because why would it be? It was fucking weird enough in the fantasy properties that it has been explored in, is biomechanical body horror.
Okay, yeah, I'm listening.
Which normally would not have a lot of place in this kind of thing. But I have very occasionally done, I think the people from my other game, which is currently on hold because all of the people in it are in Belfast, can attest to the horror of the giant prosthetic spider, which is this, like, giant biomechanical horror built out of, like, hundreds of magical prosthetics and a person just encased in this metal shell screaming. So that was a fucked up scenario. There's examples like the Phyrexians from Magic the Gathering. They love some biomechanical horror, and there's, like, also some of the mad scientist stuff that you might want to put into, like, a Ravenloft campaign or something like that, or that I might want to put into Varash, might involve that sort of thing. You also occasionally get it in properties that aren't strictly speaking fantasy, but can include fantasy elements, and generally have a lower tech level than, you know, biomechanical body horror would generally imply, such as superhero comics, right?
Yeah, but I mean, as well, this stuff's kind of in some anime series as well, where it's sort of steampunky, but still fantasy.
Mixing the two is quite anime. But also it just works for, like, it works for the way it was done with the Phyrexians in Magic is that the Phyrexians are an invading force, right? They come into other people's planes and, like, corrupt them and take them over. And in the case of, I found actually it wasn't like a whole host of characters. It was actually a couple. One specifically called Glyssa, who is, I believe, she gets 2 different cards. One for when she's, like, a normal elf character, and then one after her fall where she's, like, turned into this monstrous, like, naga-like creature on a biomechanical throne. And I think definitely we could have some fun with the idea that this monster that we want to make is a corrupted form of something that could be recognized, which is the kind of horror that underlies things like John Carpenter's The Thing, for instance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm also sort of thinking of, I don't know why, but Thomas the Tank Engine. I don't know why I'm going there
Explain,
right now.
Please?
Well, it's stuff like, you know, like...
are we talking about, like, the thing where in Thomas the Tank Engine they, like, portray the horror of, like, the Reverend Audrey's opposition to British Rail's scrapping policy?
Yeah.
Where it's just, like, they take these sapient beings away and then just, like, cut them up while they're alive.
Yeah.
That's an appropriate story for children.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely, like, could have that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just like, yeah. I don't know why I went there, but I did.
I don't know really that it truly keys in, but I can see why you went there, that we want that kind of body horror.
Although, if we wanted to tie it into... I know you said biomechanical, I know you're really fixed on this, but what we could do is maybe bioplant... Like, plant...
Do you mean, like, there is a word for it, but you mean, like, rather than being essentially turned into, like, a really mucky cyborg, they're, like, fused with plants?
Yeah.
That's cool. whilst trying not to reveal too much, I feel like if we're going to aim for something like
that's okay.
entirely
We'll do
new,
it
might be too close to what I have in mind for what the Fae Queen is like.
Okay, Alex. I get you. It's just I just looked over at my figure of poison ivy for a minute and I was like, oh no,
that's super cool. Like the idea of I'm trying to think. Like I think when you fight poison ivy in Arkham Asylum, she's like that. I can't remember whether that's the case or whether she just like stands by and she has like a giant Audrey 2 type plant.
She's a giant Audrey 2 type thing. That's mostly poison ivy's shtick. But I do remember one of my memories from her as a child was that really fucking horrific episode where Alfred and Leslie, who's Batman's physician, they get like they win like a thing on like a cruise, and like they go to like a spa retreat, and Batman's like, I'm coming with also. And because he's like, I don't trust this, and then it's like, it's poison ivy at her, and then she basically turns all of these old people into like basically like trees, and just so she can steal all their jewelry, and it's like, that's so extra poison ivy. Why would you go through all of this horrendous body horror? And I mean, I saw that when I was like 7. That had an impression on me at a very young age, I think. Anyway,
I worry about showing children body horror.
Yeah.
Not because I worry particularly about, traumatizing children, though that is a concern, but because I worry that if you start getting too weird with the body horror, what you end up with is children who grow up into adults with weird fetishes.
Yeah.
Because they had this formative experience with like this really fucked up body horror concept.
Yeah, like is that why I found poison ivy so attractive as a kid?
No, I feel like you found poison ivy so attractive because poison ivy is essentially like queer lady bait.
Yeah, that's true.
But there is that possibility because like it has like if she turned them into trees, were they like immobile? They've like rooted
they
to
were
the ground.
Immobile.
That has like bondage overtones.
That's true. Oh shit. At least we found our cold open. Beth discovered something about herself again. Oh dear. Anyway.
It's like, I know, like, there's a definite possibility that I had formative experiences like that I kind of wish that I hadn't done.
Yeah. It's like, again, this is why I said all millennials are furries, because we all grew up watching Pokemon, Digimon, and Disney movies.
Yeah.
It's just, we all grew up, we're all furries. All of us are furries because we grew up having formative experiences with incredibly well-written and attractive characters that also happen to be animals.
Oh, I've figured out why I'm so intrigued by the idea of like mixing fantasy concepts with biomechanical body horror.
Why?
It's because of fucking Doom.
Of course it is!
Because, right, in Doom, it's like futuristic, but it's also like weirdly religiously themed because like it's literally hell where all the demons are coming from, but also sometimes the demons are cyborgs and sometimes the demons are people or used to be people and now they're half person, half demon, and occasionally a third person, a third demon, and a third robot.
Yeah.
Sabaoth from Doom 3 is pretty fucking weird.
Yeah.
He's like a tank but half a man but also a demon.
Yeah.
It's fucked up. And I love that idea that like I don't know how Doom gets away with mixing all of these like disparate themes together in a way that seems to make sense.
Heavy metal music, that's how.
Probably actually, like all of those things work for heavy metal music. It's like
it's robots, pure aesthetic.
Beefy men, demons from hell, and you just as long as you play a heavy metal soundtrack, you can just like mix them all together, and it's fine. It doesn't clash anime wise like at all. Fucking cheating. But no, I definitely love that shit. I should finish Doom 2016, but like my computer can only just run it, so I have to like shut everything else down to play it, and even then I can only play it for small bursts at a time. Yeah. But yeah, I do. I like when that kind of mixing of themes is done well. Yeah. Because so often it isn't, and sometimes when it's done in anime, like it's done in a way that I feel as well. Like I know that it might be like a cross-cultural thing that in Japan they're just much more open to the idea of mixing those kinds of themes without any like clashing problems, but I don't know. I'm not saying that there aren't anime that have done it well, because I think there definitely are. No, yeah. I've even seen some of them. but no, I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's stuff like Fullmetal Alchemist has like a lot of sciencey themes.
Yeah,
in it,
Fullmetal Alchemist does seem to have like a unity of theme to it.
Yeah, but it is fundamentally about magic. But I guess it frames the magic as science, but a lot of it's also about like.
Well, the thing about magic and science is that if you frame it as alchemy, which is magic done in a scientific way, as Fullmetal Alchemist does, I believe, then you can kind of get away with that because that connects those together.
It also slaps this sort of weird kind of early 20th century aesthetic on it, like.
Right. Yeah.
You know, like, and you're like, this is interesting, but I mean that's because it kind of works because it's all about like basically how Germany treated Jewish and Romani people in World War II and during the rise of Hitler.
Yeah.
Because the lady who wrote Fullmetal Alchemist is woke as fuck. Like, she's like, I noticed there are a lot of my contemporaries who idolize Nazi Germany because nationalism. I'm gonna tell you what, fuck y'all. Saying that, she does sort of take a lot of Jewish symbols and symbolism, and, you know, that Fullmetal Alchemist is a conversation for another day.
I think the only thing that I would add is that we do, probably, I think, entirely thanks to Dr. Mengele, not Gregor Mendel, he's the P-man, Dr. Mengele. We do so love associating Nazis with body horror.
That's true, yeah.
Because that guy did some fucked up shit to a lot of innocent people.
Yeah, that was not right, dude.
Yeah.
Glad you did.
I mean, I don't know necessarily that we need to, like, conceptually wrap his knuckles, because even before he did all of the fucked up body horror shit, dude was a fucking Nazi, so...
That's true, yeah. I mean, I do look, in today's political climate, apparently
I feel
you have to clarify being
if we
a Nazi
have to explain the concept of Nazis are bad and you shouldn't idolize them to our audience, something has gone very wrong.
Yeah, like, if we're, like, you know, like, let's face it, we're not, like, you know, all of these white nationalists on YouTube who are like, why is everyone in my comments a Nazi? I just don't understand why so many Nazis like me. It's because you're a white nationalist and therefore are also a Nazi. Why is this concept difficult for you to grasp, Sargon of Akkad? I don't. He doesn't listen to this. I can say whatever the fuck I like about Sargon of Akkad.
Sure, I'm going to cut it out because it's not relevant and I don't want to start.
That's true. That's true.
Anyway, so yeah, do we want to do... I think even if we're not going to go down like the biomechanical route, we definitely want to have like this monster is a modification of an existing person or entity.
Okay, yeah. I like that, yeah. So
we want to an extent the undead are already this.
Yeah.
But I think we want something different. So what do we want?
You know, we want the kind, like, we want this to be a modification of an existing person who is like who would be almost well beloved by the players at this point. Like,
at the very least, almost. We want the players to be shocked and upset that this person like comes back as... Because this is the thing. I'm reading her article now. Like, I wasn't around for this release of Magic, but apparently Glissa was a pretty sympathetic character before she got turned into like Glissa the Traitor, who's black-green. Like, the idea is, no, a horrible thing has happened to this entity, and now they return as a servant of evil. And I mean, it's up to us how we want to do that. We might want to do it like Gordon Freeman in Full Life Consequences, that he's had science put in him.
You know, let's assume that. I mean, I guess we could take one of our existing NPCs, but that feels almost too mean and also self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
If we do it to an existing NPC we have.
Well,
the temptation to do it to Velander just to torture Maxie further, just personally, just to torture one viewer.
I don't really want to do this to an existing NPC either, because I worry that you know how I didn't want to do the plant thing because I also don't want to do it in a way that will torture Maxie because Anyway, right. So I think I'm trying to think. Do we maybe want to tie this into like later on after that scenario that we made in the Making Your Own Scenario episode?
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
So, maybe let's come up with a little campaign story that might explain this monster.
Okay.
So, the basilisk was like the end goal of that scenario, right?
Yeah.
But a basilisk is it's not quite a dumb animal, but you know, it can't really be the mastermind behind everything.
Yeah.
So maybe the basilisk was sent there by like this person, this entity, the big bad. We don't necessarily need to worry about them.
Yeah.
Maybe this big bad attacked a wizarding school because they favor putting science inside of people rather than magic.
Yeah.
And they hate magic and stuff. So maybe like later you find like, oh, maybe like later on, like way later on, you find out that like a student, like a promising student who did we ever have them like interact with students? I think like briefly we had them interact with students in that.
Yeah,
scenario.
like at the end, and you kind of we introduced some key NPCs
or,
then. Like...
oh, maybe that teacher, because I think we had the thing where like they could unpetrify a teacher who knew Stone to Flesh.
Yeah, was it Professor Fundy Wumba or something like that?
Somebody who the players met and probably interacted with enough to care about tangentially, and maybe we initially have that character like interact with the players a bit more to give them other stuff, you know, other plot hooks, and then the character kind of fades out of the story. Yeah. And later, if the players ask about after them, it's emerged that they've gone missing, and it's like, oh, well, that's worrying. Oh. So they go out and look for them, and as it turns out, they've been kidnapped by the big bad and have had science put in them, and are now a horrible entity. And the reason I'm thinking about that is because you then have like the first property that we want to apply to this monster, which is that it's a spellcaster.
Yes.
Right? So...
Yeah, absolutely.
Spellcasting monsters... I don't hate spellcasting monsters. I hate dealing with spellcasting monsters because I find how that's done, like the easiest way to do that. If you come across the monster like as you're bringing it up, you're like, oh shit, now I have to go through like the player's handbook looking for all of these spells, which is when my spell cards come in, and I really should like sort them to a usable order.
Yeah, I need to buy some spell cards
pretty good
as well.
for that. Spellcasting monsters. Spellcasting is a way of making like monsters powerful in a way that doesn't like involve you coming up with loads of new abilities, right? Because those abilities are already there, and they're already powerful. Why would you not use them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So okay, we have this guy has been turned. We'll say it is the teacher, right? The teacher has been turned into a horrible monstrosity, transfigured, if you will, which is ironic given that he is, I believe, the transfiguration teacher, except transfigured with surgery and things. And now he is a horrible entity. Yeah.
I kind of don't want to say that he's a giant robot spider, because that's so typical.
Also, if he was like a giant robot spider, we could like start with the Dryder stat block to work off, which I feel kind of defeats the point of coming up with a new thing. But why don't we go with, I mean, obviously, maybe not his minions, but minions he has access to. Because he's not the big bad. The big bad is, I don't know, a god of, like, artifice or something? I don't know. Yeah,
Necro-technomancer.
Like but evidently,
Techno-necromancer.
Our ex-friend has been given access to some entities. So ideally we want these guys to be low level, right? Because not super low level, because obviously we want him to be fairly high level.
Yeah.
But we want them to be low level enough that it can be a decent challenge for the players to deal with a large number of these things. Probably like as they approach his lair. So what are we thinking? You could maybe have like something with like a brain in a jar, because that's kind of like almost gothic horror mad science-y enough to work.
Well, I mean, we definitely want like, I mean, nothing fucks you up more seeing like human limbs being used in ways that they shouldn't be used in, like seeing legs as hands. That's fucked up. Or hands as legs. That's messed up too.
Creature from like an old Call of Cthulhu scenario that I ran once. That's like there's this guy and he's been experimenting with like weird human monstrosities before, basically as like trial runs before he works on his Eldritch Horror son. by adding children's arms to him. And he's made this thing that's
Okay,
about as
yeah.
intelligent as a house cat, but it's made out of like a woman's head, but with like her legs coming out of like the sides of her head, and it just runs around and just stares at people. It's fucked.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. Yeah, but yeah, basically bits of body attached to other bits of the body that shouldn't be attached to it. It's generally fucked up.
We could definitely have that. I'm just thinking, like, I really like the idea of brains in jars, because you know that's creepy, right? You've confided in me before that you really don't like the idea of disembodied brains. Yeah, and I love this idea that like all of these minions used to be a person, or at least some form of like animal.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, like, what monster can we rip the stat block apart of to make this? Is the thing. It's like there's so many different things that you could work with.
Yeah.
I think ideally we want something... Oh! Maybe we want like that, but they're like spider things with brains on them, and the spider limbs are like human fingers. So it's got like this little like metal base, but then it uses like elongated fingers as its legs and shit like that.
Okay.
Because then
that's pretty fucked up. Yeah, okay.
Stick some stuff onto the crawling claw as a monster, or some other like small crawling thing with a low challenge rating, right? Well, maybe not the crawling claw actually, because the crawling claw like has a challenge rating of literally 0, and I feel like a brain in a jar would probably be intelligent enough to like be stronger than that. So maybe if we go to like miscellaneous creatures in the back and we pick one of the spiders, like maybe the
okay, yeah.
Giant spider. Where's the giant spider? I know it's here somewhere. Giant octopus, giant scorpion, giant spider. Right. This thing has a challenge rating of 1. Just thinking, or we could go with giant scorpion, which has a challenge rating of 3.
Giant scorpion, I think. We want to make these guys pretty...
Right, because we probably want like the teacher to be like challenge rating like 12 or something, because this is going to be pretty late.
Yeah.
So, alright, we work with giant scorpion. Now, what do these things have? They have blind sight 60 feet. Blind sight is probably good, because if it's a brain in a jar, it's probably not seeing with eyes. It's got some other way of detecting stuff. Passive perception 9, which, again, it's a brain in a jar, that probably works. Because for all you detect things with ways other than eyes, you know, you're not that gifted with perception. It has high strength, medium dex, high con, low int. I think maybe we want to do some fucking about with that. Like, maybe we want to kick the constitution down to a +0 modifier, and then kick the intelligence up to, like, maybe a -1. Because, I mean, they're not particularly bright, but when you're a brain in a jar, intelligence is kind of like the only thing you've got going for you. Then, as it's armor class 15, I'm okay with that, because I feel like probably you'd have the brain in like a glass bulb on the front, which would be able to take a beating, but it's like it's a glass, so eventually maybe we give it like a weakness to bludgeoning damage, just because like if you're wailing on the glass, then you like let the brain out. So this thing multi-attacks with claws and a sting. I feel like you could probably actually make a case for this thing just like mechanically having at least the sting added. Like, I like the idea of it having like a little syringe or something that just like fires at you to try and like. But we could maybe like make it not poison or something, or maybe you could have like different flavors of this where like they come in different colors, and depending on the color, like it changes what special weapon they're packing in their stinger. Like, some of them poison you. Some of them try and paralyze you. Some of them maybe like try and mutate you or something. Like, who knows? That would be cool, I think. And then you got these claws, I don't know about the claws, personally. I feel like maybe if we just give it the sting, and then, like, let it attack multiple times with the sting, maybe?
Yeah.